Everyone knows that if they want to become superheroes, rich people often rely on technology, while poor people rely on genetic modification. Have you ever imagined that one day you will receive amazing superpowers through a sudden accident from which you will step up to the top of life? But the reality is much more cruel, because sudden changes in nature often do not go in a positive direction. In the DC universe, where famous superheroes like Superman or Batman exist, besides lucky people like Flash or Green Lantern, nature also gives birth to some unlucky people. When these people possess powerful abilities, their lives also fall into the most tragic circumstances. They are not superheroes, they are not supervillains, but people often call them useless and unlucky people. Today, I will introduce to you a movie adapted from a comic book with a strange and dramatic style called Doom Patrol. The story began in 1948 in Paraguay. Morden was a small businessman with a secretive streak, and he sought out a mad scientist named Von Fuchs to volunteer as a test subject. If there was a chance to gain superpowers, there would definitely be opportunists who would do anything to try their luck, such as this man before us. Von Fuchs sneered, letting this merchant with his petty mindset repeat the phrase, "Ideas are limitless," over and over. Immediately after, a white light burst out violently and Morden's body cracked open. The scene then shifted to America in 1988, where the star racer Cliff was enjoying the most successful life. Having a beautiful wife at home still didn't seem to be enough for him, as he even secretly got involved with his daughter's nanny. Cliff's wife actually realized this early on. In revenge, during one of Cliff's important matches, his wife, who was standing outside the track, deliberately touched the sensitive part of the racing coach. After witnessing that scene, Cliff lost his concentration and got into a serious car accident. When he woke up, his vision seemed to have shrunk into a narrow screen. An old man occasionally stopped by. He said a few words to the screen, and then he taught Cliff to speak like he was teaching a child. At this time, Cliff discovered that the calendar had turned to 1995. It turned out that after the tragic accident years ago, Cliff was left with only his brain intact. The old man in front of him was called Niles, or the Chief, and was a scientist. Niles built Cliff a mechanical body to contain the brain. Cliff's memory when he first woke up was still quite chaotic. There were several friends in the house who took turns taking care of him. Among them, the strangest looking person was the man wrapped tightly in bandages like a mummy. His name was Larry, also known as Negative Man. Larry used to be an excellent test pilot of the U.S. Air Force. During a test mission called Project Mercury, his fighter plane flew into near space and was heavily affected by cosmic radiation, causing him to lose control and crash on the spot. Surprisingly, Larry was still alive from the explosion. Although his appearance was completely destroyed, he still survived. Compared to Larry, who looked abnormal, his friend Rita, also known as Elasti Woman, had a more beautiful and elegant appearance. When you hear about Rita's abilities, you might think of Straw Hat Luffy or Reed Richards in Fantastic Four. But if you think so, you're wrong. Her abilities aren't that powerful or beautiful. Rita used to be a famous movie star. While filming a movie set in Africa, due to a malfunction in the set props, she accidentally fell into the water. In the water, Rita inhaled a strange substance. When she returned to shore, everyone was afraid to approach her. It turned out that Rita's face had been deformed, making it difficult to maintain its original shape. Her body also became soft and easily changed shape like clay, so she was nicknamed Rubber Woman. Under the care of friends in the same situation, Cliff tried his best to adapt to this new body. He just hoped to see his wife and daughter again soon. However, when he was able to walk normally and was about to set out to find his family, Niles revealed a cruel truth. When people encounter a major incident, sometimes the brain will activate a self-defense mechanism by changing memories. What Cliff remembers is not the truth of the past. Niles took out the old phone call recording, and he gradually made Cliff's true memories appear. In that year's race, he did not have an accident, but he used excellent techniques to overcome danger and win the championship. However, the affair was exposed, causing him and his wife to decide to separate. People only know how to cherish things after they have lost them. Cliff made a tearful phone call to temporarily reconcile with his family, but good swimmers often drown. This outstanding racer crashed his car on the highway because of a moment of carelessness. Cliff's wife and daughter died on the spot, leaving only Cliff alive. He was in extreme pain, but he couldn't feel physical pain. He couldn't even bring himself to hurt himself to relieve his emotions. From that day on, Cliff completely became a robot, with both his body and soul as cold as iron. However, time is the best medicine. Although all three of them had encountered different great misfortunes, time seemed to no longer age their bodies, and the wounds in their hearts gradually healed. In the blink of an eye, 25 years had passed, and this strange group welcomed a new member who was even more bizarre. Her name was Jane, but she wasn't just Jane. There were 64 different personalities in her body. Jane was just the main personality. The most special thing was that each personality possessed a separate type of superpower. She was literally an army by herself. Jane's presence made the special people's shelter called Doom Manor much more lively. After all, there were 64 people at the same time, most of whom were noisy and troublesome. Normally, Niles forbade them from going out, but today Niles had to go away. Jane found a bus and invited everyone to go to the nearby town to have fun. Having stayed in the manor for too long, they all felt claustrophobic and confined, so a few of them decided to disobey Niles's ban and go out together. At first, everything went quite smoothly. The group split up to act. Rita met her fans and excitedly talked about the glorious years of the past. The other party thought Rita was just someone who looked like the female star of the past. Therefore, this person kept talking about his experience chasing after his idol. Cliff and Jane talked about sad things in the past. He sadly told about his regret when both his wife and daughter passed away. Meanwhile, Larry walked into a bar. Everyone thought he had just gotten full-body plastic surgery from the hospital, so they were interested in looking at his bandaged appearance. However, Larry had long known that he was different. He was actually gay. In the past, society's treatment of homosexuals was no better than that of mummies, so his tolerance was extremely good. However, other people started to have trouble. Jane found a news report about Cliff's car accident years ago, in which it was written that the little girl in the car had luckily survived. This made Cliff feel extremely difficult to accept. In a fit of anger, he crushed Jane's phone. This action attracted the attention of the police. As a result, Jane immediately transformed into an antisocial personality, and she cursed the police violently. What was more troublesome was that on the other side, fans suddenly mentioned bad rumors about Rita after she went into hiding. This made Rita mentally panic. She was temporarily unable to maintain her appearance, causing half of her face to sag. As a result, the more Rita panicked, the more her body melted. Finally, she turned into a giant mass of flesh, rolling on the street and almost crushed the out-of-control bus. Right at that moment, the most clear-headed Larry let the energy entity leave his body along with his consciousness, causing his physical body to collapse unconscious on the ground. Faced with the emergency, an extremely destructive personality of Jane, Sun Daddy, suddenly appeared. He wanted to use an explosion to forcibly stop Rita, causing Cliff to be scared and speak up to stop him. It seemed that at this time, only he could come forward to solve everything. Cliff directly flipped up a large piece of concrete to block Rita. That night, after acting on their own and causing a big disaster, the group naturally couldn't avoid a scolding from Niles. However, Niles wasn't angry because they were causing chaos in the town, but he was afraid that this incident would attract his enemies to Doom Manor. Now that everything had happened, they were forced to leave this place and flee. Faced with Niles's blame, Cliff questioned him about why he hid the fact that his daughter had still been alive. Niles explained that it was to protect Cliff, because a father who had passed away suddenly, returning in the form of a robot, was not something everyone could accept. Niles then said that even though the outside world might not understand and accept them, if they continued to stay here, it was very likely that they and the entire town would be destroyed by his enemies. Therefore, they were forced to leave immediately. Cliff, however, thought that Niles should not abandon the town and run away like that. He thought they should stay and help the people fight against the upcoming strong enemy. But these words did not convince Niles. The enemy's strength seemed to be beyond everyone's imagination. Cliff insisted on staying, so Niles had to take the others to the car and leave the manor. Halfway there, Niles felt guilty about leaving his teammates behind and decided to turn the car around. Rita and Larry also agreed. They returned to Cliff's side, preparing to fight the strong enemy together. With a tremor of the sky and earth, a donkey appeared right in front of them. The donkey provoked by releasing a stream of air, which flew into the air and turned into the words, "The mind is the limit." Not wrong at all. The man who was torn apart at the beginning of the movie had come looking for Niles. He just clapped his hands, and a vortex of energy suddenly appeared on the street, pulling everything in and swallowing it completely. Niles' enemy, Morden, summoned a vortex right in the center of town, almost sucking the entire town in. The four main characters relied on their own abilities to barely hold their bodies together. But Niles, who already had trouble moving around, was swept in along with his wheelchair. Jane saw that scene and jumped into the vortex to save save Niles, but when the vortex disappeared, the entire town was a dangerous Niles and Jane did not return. They all disappeared from the world. At this time, in another city in America, two petty thieves encountered the superhero Cyborg, also known as Vic. He easily defeated them. Dealing with petty thieves all day made Vic feel bored. He also wanted to confront big supervillains like Joker or Riddler. After a while of searching, the news of Rita's madness caught Vic's attention. The more he looked into it, the more he realized that this was not simple. The latest news of the blockade said that the entire town of Cloverton had disappeared on the spot, and the senior Vic respected, Niles, was living in this town. The next day, due to unstable emotions, Rita kept losing control of her body shape, and Larry wanted to leave the town to hide for a while, but the energy entity kept escaping from his body, causing him to miss the ride. It seemed that the entity in Larry's body and consciousness had not yet reached unity. Unlike the two who were sinking into despair, Cliff was still trying to find a way to save his friends who were swallowed by the vortex. While chasing the donkey that appeared last night, he met Vic, whose body was half mechanical. At first, Vic thought that it was this group of strange people recruited by Niles that flattened the whole town. After discovering the truth, Vic became even more confused. The only clue was a donkey. This donkey quickly proved Cliff's words to be true. It suddenly vomited Jane out. But after Jane returned, the personality that appeared was someone else. She was completely unable to explain what happened in the vortex. In the end, she transformed into the personality of a little girl named Baby Doll, who happened to be a fan of Vic and was extremely excited to talk to her idol. Cliff was ignored, so he had to go somewhere else in frustration. He went to Niles's archives and looked through Jane's files. All of Jane's personalities lived together in an imaginary space called the Underground. When they are not appearing, they stay down there. The place was like a massive subway system, and the personalities living inside it were each more dangerous than the last. For example, the personality Sun Daddy, who had just appeared, was a dangerous one, ready to spark a fire and set off trouble at the slightest provocation. The personalities that appeared later were all people with strange personalities. For example, Silver Tongue had the ability to turn words into metal to launch attacks, making Cliff struggle to defend. In the end, Vic had to decisively lock Jane in the room, locking her and the other 63 personalities inside. Giving up on asking for information from Jane, Vic had to think of a way to find clues from the donkey's body. Surprisingly, the donkey's mouth actually contained a secret. Its throat was a keyhole. This proved that it was very likely a door connecting to where Niles was being held. Vic wanted Rita to crawl into the donkey's mouth to examine its internal structure, and then he would pull her out. Even though she did not want to, Rita decided to risk her life by sticking her head into the donkey's mouth for Niles' sake. But the problem was that once Rita got in, she could not get out. She also dragged Vic and Larry, who had been holding her outside, into the donkey's mouth. In the connected world inside the donkey's mouth, someone had prepared 3 headphones corresponding to the 3 people who had just been swallowed: Vic, Larry, and Rita. After putting on the headphones, a man's rambling voice rang out from inside. This person called himself Mist Nobody, the same man who had been torn apart at the beginning of episode 1. He had disintegrated and swallowed the entire town, and moreover, his abilities were far beyond that. After that, the 3 of them were brought into the illusions created by Miss Nobody. Rita returned to her prime as a star, filming a movie that had the potential to compete for major awards, and it seemed like countless praises were right before her eyes. But the next second, the entire crew disappeared. The feeling of losing after having gained was even more painful. She fell into fear of her reputation being destroyed. Larry appeared on the experimental plane, his appearance restored to its original state. After a while of manipulation, he saved the plane that was supposed to crash that day. But before he could rejoice, his wife and his homosexual lover suddenly appeared in the cockpit. This was the deepest fear in Larry's heart. He was afraid of having to choose between the 2 people he loved. Vic's situation was the most miserable. He went straight back to the night his mother's laboratory had exploded. In that accident, he lost half of his body and his mother. In the end, his father had transformed him into a half-human, half-machine so he could survive. The pain of losing his mother, without any change in the situation, was enough to make Vic unbearable. Fortunately, Larry's troublesome energy entity took action at this time. The entity entity launched a powerful attack, tearing apart all illusions and different spaces. Mr. Nobody was also forced to avoid this spike and let everyone go back, only to see the donkey connecting the two worlds vomit violently, spitting out the entire town and everyone, then exploding into a shower of flesh and blood. The streets and buildings that had been destroyed were all returned to their original state, but only Niles was nowhere to be seen. Not long after, Vic's father, Silas, followed the signal to Doom Manor. He originally intended to take Vic home, but Vic insisted on finding Niles before returning. Silas believed that his talented friend Niles would definitely be able to resolve the danger himself. He did not need anyone to rescue him. However, Silas could not convince his stubborn son and had to leave Vic alone. Through the documents Niles left behind and the superior AI system in Vic, the group discovered that Mr. Nobody and the donkey had appeared before in Paraguay in 1948. Vic immediately called everyone together and prepared to go to Paraguay together to find clues about Mr. Nobody. Vic originally thought he could take a ride on his father's company jet, but Silas did not agree with his son's actions and locked his account. Vic had no choice but to find an old bus to take everyone all the way. The group took turns driving, but when Larry took the wheel, he argued with the entity in his body. As a result, the entity got angry and damaged the bus. This time, there was a big problem. They didn't even have a broken car to go, so they had to work together to push the car to a nearby motel. Larry sat on a chair outside the motel, feeling guilty for delaying his journey. He couldn't help but recall the past. Actually, Larry's wife had long realized his sexual problem. Although Larry had no desire for women, he and his wife still had very deep feelings, which made Larry extremely tormented. Since the motel only had one room left, they had to squeeze into 2 beds to sleep overnight. The next day, Rita needed a lot of time to adjust her emotions to maintain her physical form. The long wait awakened an impatient personality in Jane, Flit. Flit directly used her teleportation ability to take Cliff and Larry to Paraguay. Larry couldn't help but complain that she had the ability to teleport, but at least she had to bring enough people. There was no other way, because the personalities living inside Jane were inherently so capricious. Here, the 3 met an Asian tourist. He said he came to Paraguay to pay Von Fuchs to modify his body. This product line had created powerful superhumans like Mr. Nobody, so he also wanted to spend a large sum of money to get superpowers for himself. It was true that the difficult search had been achieved by chance. The 3 people resolutely followed the tourist to Von Fuchs's base to check on the situation. In another development, Vic and Rita were confused when they received good news. Although Silas' father was strict on the outside, he loved his son in his heart. He finally gave in and sent a plane to pick up Vic. The 2 of them flew to Paraguay to continue participating in the action. At the base, Von Fuchs's servant mistook them all for customers. Therefore, he used a very long puppet show to introduce the origin of Von Fuchs' most successful work, Mr. Nobody. The remaining details match perfectly with the scene where Mr. Nobody appears. Surprisingly, right after the test began, Niles, who was still able to walk, suddenly appeared. He shot and killed the evil Von Fuchs, then destroyed the machine and took away a very important object. However, Niles' intervention did not prevent the birth of Mr. Nobody, and Von Fuchs' body modification business continues to operate to this day. With the thought of, how can you catch a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den, the 3 of them decided to personally experience the modification process to see what would happen. However, these 3 poor people, even if they gathered all the money on them, would not be able to pay the fee. Fortunately, this place has always only welcomed ordinary people who aspire to have superpowers. This is the first time that people who already possess superpowers want to recycle themselves. So the staff here broke the rules and served all 3 for free. First, they took Larry, aka Negative Man, into the lab. The cold metal door reminded him of the horrifying experience after the plane crash years ago. When Larry woke up with his body severely burned due to the strong radiation on his body, the medical staff in the hospital were accidentally affected and all died. After that, Larry was locked in a special hospital room. He was isolated by a thick metal door. His wife, who had endured too much pressure during the time living with him, proposed to break up. It's feared that their innocent children would also find it hard to accept their father's current appearance. Although Larry was reluctant, he had to accept the cruel truth. When the machine started operating, Larry seemed to have a chance to choose again. The bandage was removed. The energy entity from the universe separated from his body, and it appeared independently right before his eyes. The first time Larry faced this entity directly, he angrily shouted that he wanted to cut off the relationship, never to see it again. At the same time, Jane was brought before von Fuchs. This remnant of the Nazi era had now turned into a half-human, half-machine monster. He seemed very interested in Jane's dozens of abilities. He enticed her by saying that he would help Jane separate her other personalities. He would return control of Jane's body to her, on the condition that Jane would not resist and voluntarily surrender her body for him to study. Jane naturally did not agree. Seeing this, von Fuchs decided to use force to force her. In contrast to Jane, who had multiple personalities in one body, von Fuchs dispersed his consciousness into many different bodies. It turned out that all the staff in the base were under the control of his consciousness. After revealing his true face, von Fuchs's puppet army began to attack Jane and Cliff. But how could this ragtag group be a match for the two of them? With just a few simple moves, Cliff and Jane settled everything. Jane's hot-tempered silver-tongued personality used sharp words to shoot down von Fuchs's half-machine body, ending the battle. These personalities acted cruelly, but also very decisively. Witnessing Cliff's bloody results, Jane couldn't help but feel scared of this huge robot. This made Cliff, who was sympathetic and wanted to care for Jane, feel sad. The sudden appearance of the two people who had just finished the battle interrupted Larry's beautiful dream. His expression was hidden behind a thick layer of ice, so no one noticed. Finally, Jane's son-daddy personality appeared and set fire to the entire laboratory, burying forever the criminal base of this Nazi remnant. It was only poor Cyborg, who had worked so hard to get to Paraguay when everything was over. He had to use a private plane to fly the group back to the US. It was like he was playing the role of a free flight attendant for the three of them. On the plane, Larry remembered the scene where his best friend came to visit him. That friend insisted on staying by Larry's side to take care of him, even though his appearance was ruined. But in the end, that friend was chased away by Larry. Actually, deep down, Larry knew that from that moment on, his life as Larry Trainer had ended. That lab could not give him anything other than a short, beautiful dream. The scene changed. From the ruins of the lab, the original Asian tourist slowly walked out. He had become a strange mutant, a combination of dinosaur, vegetables, and minerals. This was a family that looked extremely happy. Every year, the parents celebrated their son's birthday. As the child grew up, strange writings began to appear on his body. Until his 18th birthday, an unexpected incident occurred. The father suddenly urged him to run away from this house immediately, otherwise, the whole world would be destroyed. As soon as he finished speaking, the mother standing behind him suddenly killed her husband. The child saw this and immediately ran away, his whereabouts unknown. The scene changed to a church, where a priest was preaching when suddenly two holes appeared on his palm, emitting a blue light. At the same time, a chaos mage, named Kipling, was frantically reading a magic book. 3 female demons tore the wall like tearing paper to find Kipling. At this moment, his spell was just completed. It shrunk all 3 female demons into the book. All signs pointed to a major event about to happen. At Doom Manor, everyone was still worried about Niles' disappearance. Suddenly, Kipling, an uninvited guest, appeared. He had originally intended to find his old friend Niles for help, but since Niles was not home, he had to ask this group of eccentrics for a little help to find an unfinished book, the unwritten book, which had the power to destroy the world. At first, everyone looked down on this gruff man. However, when Kipling summoned a prophetic entity from a coin, they were forced to take the matter seriously. The floating green head used a song to point out the location of the unwritten book. After some discussion, the group decided to help Kipling retrieve the book. Through the portal opened by Kipling, they brought back the unlucky boy who had appeared earlier, named Elliot. In the chaos, they conveniently pushed the mother, who had been chasing Elliot, back to the gate. It turned out that the unwritten book was not an ordinary book, but this boy Elliot. Kipling intended to burn Elliot alive on the spot to prevent the apocalypse, but he was strongly opposed by everyone. Kipling said that, besides killing Elliot, there was a more difficult way to prevent the disaster, which was to close the door leading to Netherspace, the underworld. This was where the Doomsday Cult, who had wanted to use the unwritten book, resided. That door was the relic wound on the priest's hand at the beginning of the film. Just stitching that wound could close the door. The group split into 2 groups. Cliff and Jane went to the church to stitch the priest's wound, but as soon as they entered, Jane's fierce hammerhead personality emerged, and she held a candlestick and tried to attack the priest. Cliff quickly stopped her. As a result, the task was not successful, and both were sucked into the netherworld by the relic wound. This netherworld looked quite peaceful. It didn't seem gloomy or scary at all. Cliff was about to scold Hammerhead when Jane switched to the innocent girl, Penny Farthing's personality, making him unable to scold her. At this time, the netherworld guards suddenly appeared and ambushed them, capturing them both both and taking them back to the palace. On the other side, the remaining people were responsible for staying at Doom Manor to protect Elliot from being taken away by the cult. Rita wasn't good at fighting, and Larry, with his unstable state, was responsible for closely protecting Elliot. Vic and Kipling were in charge of confronting the enemy head-on. The cult sent an army of puppets made from letters. Their fighting power wasn't too strong. Vic and Kipling easily defeated a large number of them. Larry's energy entity had one move to wipe out the whole group, but unfortunately, these puppets attacked continuously. Vic's energy was gradually depleted, and Kipling's magic was also exhausted. At this time, the core member of the cult personally took action. Kipling saw that the situation was not good, so he left Vic and went to Plan B, which was to kill Elliot to prevent the book from falling into enemy hands. Rita used her ability to stretch her arms and pin Kipling to the wall to stop him, but at that moment, the female cultist sneaked in from the other side and kidnapped Elliot. In the end, Vic was surrounded and suffered a powerful electric shock, but fortunately the electric shock recharged his energy. Vic delivered the decisive blow to end the battle. Back in the Netherworld Palace, the one sitting on the throne was Elliot's mother and deceased father. In her domain, Elliot's mother could control everything at will. She transformed Cliff and Jane into forms that reflected their innermost selves. Cliff returned to his normal self, while Jane saw her other personalities in the mirror. Next, she transformed them into how they appeared in each other's eyes. Cliff became bloody and ferocious, while Jane turned into Cliff's daughter. Before they could react, she transformed them back into their true nature, a brain and a scared little girl. What was even more strange was that the netherworld they were standing in was actually just a toy snow globe located in Doom Manor. At this time, the female monsters began to read the contents of the unwritten book. A giant blue eye called the D-Creator appeared in the sky. Wherever the D-Creator's gaze swept, all organic and inorganic creatures turned to dust, signaling the arrival of the apocalypse. The situation was so dire that even Mr. Nobody, who had stood outside all laws, could not sit still. He was forced to stop torturing Niles, who had been shrunk and sent flying around, to ask Niles if he had any brilliant ideas. Niles was indeed knowledgeable. He actually had a way to stop the Decreator. If there was a Decreator, there was also a Recreator. The way to summon the Recreator was similar, requiring a group of believers with strong inner strength to create a Recreator book to summon it. Mr. Nobody was an entity that could move freely in space and time. Following Niles' instructions, he returned to 1977. At that time, Jane was imprisoned in a brutal mental hospital. The doctor treating Jane was a violent and paranoid man who often used strong measures on her. However, in Jane's body was a master of psychological manipulation, Dr. Harrison. This personality appeared, and with just a few words, the doctor wanted to end his own life. At that moment, Mr. Nobody immobilized the doctor, freed Dr. Harrison, and asked her to help save the world. At the current Doom Manor, everyone was in despair until Niles walked in with his own 2 feet. Everyone quickly asked about Mr. Nobody, but every time this name was mentioned, Niles vomited continuously. It turned out that Niles and Miss Nobody had reached an agreement. He was temporarily restored to his legs to return to the manor to command the overall situation. To ensure, Mr. Nobody had cast a curse that if Niles heard or talked about him, Niles would vomit. Niles' mission was to find the Book of Regeneration in the current timeline, to summon the Recreator, to eliminate the destruction of the Decreator. But when he summoned the Prophet again, he did not immediately sense the existence of the book. That was because in 1977, Mr. Nobody had not yet completed the mission. He kept the personality of Dr. Harrison so that she could preach crazily in the mental hospital, cramming knowledge about the Recreator into all the doctors and patients. Gradually, the entire hospital became fanatical followers of the Recreator. Since the Decreator had been summoned, Elliot's mother thought that everything was settled, so she let Cliff and Jane out of the palace. But Cliff was still upset about being trapped in the snow globe. He accidentally scolded Jane a few times, causing the penny-farthing personality to retreat in grievance, and the hot-tempered main personality to appear again. Cliff curiously asked about penny-farthing, but Jane scolded him. That girl seemed to be a forbidden area for Jane. At this time, Niles' group was at a standstill because they had not found the Book of Regeneration. The Prophet pointed at a thug. After subduing him, they discovered that his body was covered with cheap tattoos. It turned out that in 1977, Harrison and his followers had decided to transfer the text-containing host from a boy to a dog. To avoid detection, they made the text invisible. Only when the bell rang would the text appear. Kipling was surprised to discover that the thug's dog was unusual. Outside the house, a group of old men and women ran over, playing old music and dancing happily. They were the followers from back then. One of the old women went to the netherworld as promised. Cliff and Jane were completely bewildered when they met the old woman, until Dr. Harrison appeared and explained everything. At this time, Elliot's mother discovered something was wrong, so she led her troops to chase after them. The old woman volunteered to stay behind and cover Harrison and Cliff's retreat. She shot and broke her own oxygen tank, sacrificing herself to create an explosion that stopped the pursuing forces. Harrison and Cliff ran up to the bell tower of the netherworld, and the two rang the steer bell. The bell rang, and the snow globe shattered. The text of the Book of Regeneration appeared on the dog. Kipling hurriedly read the words aloud, summoning the Recreator. The vanished lives and matter gradually returned. The Recreator and Decreator, now in the form of two giant eyes in the sky, stared at each other, creating a rather comical scene. But anyway, the disaster was over. Before everyone could rejoice, Mr. Nobody sent Niles back to another dimension, not giving him a chance to say goodbye, and conveniently destroyed Vic's mechanical arm. Vic's system was forced to send out an emergency distress signal. Back at the mental hospital in 1977, Dr. Harrison finally paid the price for her actions. The attending physician and the henchman wore earplugs to avoid being brainwashed by her, and they decided to perform a lobotomy to turn her into an idiot. When Harrison fell into despair, the driver who took her there suddenly politely said hello. That driver was Niles. That was the first time the two met. Since then, Jane was no longer alone with 64 personalities. She was about to have friends who were not perfect but very interesting. On the way, Mr. Nobody's whisper rang in Harrison's ear. After saving the world, find Doom Patrol for me. Miss Nobody told Jane to find Doom Patrol. Receiving this news, Vic looked it up and discovered that Doom Patrol was a small superhero group that operated in the 50s of the last century. But suddenly one day they disappeared without a trace. They withdrew from the underworld without anyone knowing the reason. Rita revealed that she had a love affair with a member of the team named Mento, the man in the helmet standing in the middle of the photos. However, they broke up not very well, so Rita did not want to mention it. As for Mist Nobody's message, Rita and Larry both thought that Jane shouldn't listen to a villain, but Jane's hot-tempered flit personality didn't care about their opinions. She directly teleported the three to the Doom Patrol base. As soon as they met, Jane rushed into a fight with Arani, aka Celsius, a member of the Doom Patrol. It seemed that they were running a school for superpowered people. Arani froze Jane's mouth. The two were about to attack when Joshua, aka Tempest, the school's manager, appeared in time to stop them. Joshua told them a few stories about Niles. Because Niles had left a room for Jane, Joshua thought they were here to enroll. What was more surprising was that Arani, who had just fought with Jane, claimed that she and Niles were actually husband and wife. This information surprised people who had known Niles for decades, such as Larry and Jane, because it was the first time they heard it. Meanwhile, Rita made an appointment to meet her ex-lover Mento privately to talk. 60 years ago, when Rita first met Mento, she still could not control her body shape. At Niles' suggestion, Mento's psychic ability helped Rita control her emotions, from which she grasped the secret to maintaining her shape. Mento had the ability to read minds, but he insisted that without permission, he would not read other people's minds. Then, Mento put on a mental amplifier hat and brought Rita into a world that was only his. There, she learned to focus completely on herself, and she was in control of her body for the first time. The two gradually developed feelings and came together. Back in the present, Mento took Rita on a tour of the school's gallery. Inside were full of Doom Patrol trophies, proof of their glorious achievements in eliminating criminals in the past. Even Mr. Nobody was once defeated by them. At the same time, Arani was also telling Larry a similar story. Years ago, Miss Nobody had placed a music player in the park. Those who heard the music went crazy. When the police arrived, they were all turned into candy puppets. The crazy people tore the puppets apart and ate the candy inside, creating a hellish scene. But in the end, under the cooperation of Doom Patrol and Niles, Mr. Nobody was still destroyed. While Arani was still talking, Niles suddenly walked into the room. The two of them acted like a real couple, which made Larry feel very strange. Rita also noticed the same abnormality. In another development, after Mento found out that Mr. Nobody was still alive, his emotions became violently agitated. He suddenly suddenly created an illusion of Mary, Rita's darkest secret. The image of Mary with her hands torn apart appeared, rekindling the painful memories that Rita wanted to bury. At this time, Mento was so old that he had to use a wheelchair to reveal his true self. His uncontrolled ability also spread to others. Jane was buried under the monstrous puzzle pieces, and Larry was sought out and taken away by military personnel. In the face of extreme fear caused by the illusion, the energy entity inside Larry flew out and snatched Mento's hat. Thanks to that, all the illusions before everyone's eyes disappeared. At this time, the school manager, Joshua, revealed the truth about this place. Indeed, years ago, Doom Patrol fought with Mr. Nobody, but in the first encounter, he aroused all the fear and weakness in the hearts of the members, causing their spirits to completely collapse. Therefore, Niles improved Mento's hat. He took advantage of Mento's great mental power to create an illusion of the school, the students, and even Niles' image, helping them live the rest of their lives in false peace. When Mento stopped using his powers, the truth was revealed that they were just pitiful old men and women with severely damaged spirits. Knowing the truth, Rita could not help but remember the scene of her farewell with Mento years ago. Mento did not keep his promise. He arbitrarily read her memories and discovered the story about Mary. He was furious with her because of that, leading to the two going their separate ways. It seemed that Rita had done something terrible to Mary, but over the years, Rita has always tried to let go of the past. Perhaps Mento and his friends should also learn to let go and reconcile with those painful memories. Rita returned the hat to Mento, and the surrounding scenery immediately returned to the school. The three of them thought they would find clues about Niles here, but unexpectedly, Mr. Nobody's instructions were just to show them the tragic end of those who dared to oppose him. The group had to return empty-handed. In another development, because Vic's hand cannon was damaged by Mr. Nobody, his father, Silas, went to Doom Manor to repair it. However, Vic seemed to not trust his father very much, and he did not want to be repaired while the system was shut down, and he was unconscious, because one of Vic's fingers was stuck in Cliff's arm. During the explosion, Silas was forced to use a tool to remove it. Taking this opportunity, Cliff asked Vic to hack into his daughter's social media account, in return for helping to monitor Silas during the repair process. As a result, Cliff hadn't been supervising for long before he got into an argument with Silas about parent-child relationships, and then he walked off right on the spot. However, Cliff's regret and remorse for his daughter touched Silas's feelings. So, after repairing Vic's body, he unlocked all system access for his son. This meant that Vic could completely escape his father's control. Overjoyed, Vic gave his father a hug after many days of separation. Although Cliff did not supervise his daughter as promised, Vic still helped him register a social media account so that he could make friends and follow his daughter's situation. But as soon as he opened his daughter's personal page, Cliff was so angry that he wanted to melt on the spot. The coach who had cheated on him in the past had now become his daughter's stepfather, and he had raised her to be a good person. The next day, the residents of Doom Manor welcomed a new day that was not very good. First was Rita, who had just been mentally provoked by Mento the day before. She was called up by Vic for a meeting, but could not control the size of her neck. As soon as she stepped out the door, she was mocked by Jane's tree-trimming personality. In her agitation, Rita could not control her legs, and as a result, one of her feet fell into the drain. The more tense she was, the more her whole body melted and slid down the drain. It took her a whole morning to calm down and restore her form. Finally, she had to drag herself back to her room to rest. When Rita was about to go out again, she heard Cliff's roar and a loud bang. Time went back to when Larry was woken up by Vic. Lately, the communication between him and the energy entity in his body had become more frequent. Because Larry was always immersed in guilt, regret, and self-reproach, the energy entity also suffered torment. Today the entity didn't care whether Larry agreed or not. It forced a dream, bringing Larry back to the moment of his last date with his homosexual partner, making him sink into it and not want to wake up. Awakened by the noise caused by Cliff, Larry lazily didn't bother to move. He continued to lie on the bed daydreaming, letting the energy entity fly out to check the situation. Time returned to when Vic woke up. He originally planned to call everyone to a quick meeting to discuss the plan to find Niles. However, the result was that except for him, everyone was a few dozen minutes late. While Vic was feeling upset, the system notified him of a new friend request on social media. After being fully unlocked, the previously blocked messages were now received, but those who befriended him, if not curious fans, were also news hunters. Only one friend who followed Vic after seeing his original photo showed disgust when seeing his mechanical body. Before Vic could feel sad, he was punched away by a furious Cliff. In self-defense, he was forced to attack this big robot. Look at what happened to Jane a few hours ago. Yesterday Joshua said that Niles left her a room at that school, causing Jane's sensitive personalities to feel abandoned by Niles. They frantically destroyed the recordings of her conversation with Niles. The personalities who understood Niles desperately tried to stop. This internal disagreement made Jane extremely miserable. At this time, a loud noise in the manor made the personalities unanimously go out to check, and as soon as they opened the door, they saw Cliff going crazy. Finally, let's see the real reason why Cliff went crazy. After seeing the news of the stepfather's adopted daughter on social media, he sat in front of the computer all night. His anger flared up, and he drove the bus straight to the stepfather's house to settle the score. But when the stepfather saw Cliff, he was not afraid. He even criticized Cliff for harming his wife, leaving behind a pile of rubbish for others to clean up, and for Cliff's daughter disturbing his single life. Cliff angrily punched him, but unexpectedly, he pulled out a gun and shot him back. This bullet didn't look normal? That's right. The stepfather that Cliff saw was actually Vic. After being restrained by everyone, Cliff regained some consciousness. At this moment, he just wanted to vent all the pain in his heart. But cursing and fighting wouldn't solve anything, so Cliff came up with an idea. Everyone here had their own troubles, so why not sit down and share them? Although no one was interested in this suggestion, they reluctantly sat down to talk to reassure Cliff. Each person took turns telling their troubles. Rita was troubled by the difficulty of maintaining her form. Larry was lonely because he had not had contact with anyone for 60 years. And Vic was heartbroken because he had caused his mother's death. Moreover, because the brain and the machine were one, Vic always doubted whether his thoughts were being controlled by the machine. When it was Jane's turn to share, she took out a picture of a personality with the ability to predict. In the picture, Vic was standing among the corpses of the group members, as if he was the one who caused the tragedy. This picture made Vic, who was already doubting himself, even more depressed. Seeing this, everyone argued loudly. Cliff angrily criticized Jane for ruining the sharing session, and at the same time, he declared that apart from the innocent girl personality, he hated all 63 other personalities. Jane angrily left. Realizing that he had misspoken, Cliff fell into a hallucination again and was about to hit someone. Vic promptly intervened to control him. With a shock, a mouse emerged from Cliff's body. It turned out that this mouse was a supervillain. At the beginning of part 1, when the group drove into town, they accidentally ran over this mouse's mother. It was instigated by Mr. Nobody and determined to take revenge on the Doom Patrol. After several months of hiding, it finally found a chance to crawl into the hole in Cliff's hand and started a bad day for the group. At this time, an agent named Wilson slowly walked into a remote street. This street was located in the middle of nowhere. It looked extremely strange. When Wilson walked in, the fallen leaves in the air suddenly arranged themselves into the words, "Hello." The passers-by also seemed strange. Wherever Wilson went, lines of text appeared to talk to him. A while later, when the agent's support team noticed the abnormality and rushed in, the whole street had disappeared without a trace. Back at Doom Manor, Vic patched up the hole in Cliff's hand, but Jane, who had been angered by Cliff, had not returned. Rita said that whenever Jane fell into a negative emotion, she would switch to Karen's personality. Karen created for herself a third-rate romance scenario in which the Prince Charming was a useless, lazy guy named Doug. They had broken up 1,000 times, but every time Karen came back, the two would rekindle their old love. Meanwhile, Larry and Vic received a package. It was a letter asking for help, addressed to Niles, and the address was Dany Street. But Vic searched the map and could not find this street. The two decided to go there to see if someone could help find Niles. When they arrived, they saw lines of text continuously appearing on the windows, and the smoke from the manhole cover also formed words, as if someone was trying to communicate with them. As directed, Larry and Vic entered a transgender bar. The host jokingly called them Pharaoh and Decreator. Then he revealed a surprising truth. Dany Street was actually a conscious entity. It had the ability to teleport around the world, and it welcomed the marginalized who had no place to live. The distress letter was sent by Dany because the Bureau of Normalcy was chasing them. Seeing the symbol of this organization, Larry remembered his painful past. After the accident, because his body contained too much cosmic radiation, he was imprisoned and brutally tortured by this organization. This organization specializes in hunting and destroying things they consider abnormal. A street that can think and move is naturally their target. The host said that a few years ago, the Bureau's Captain Darren targeted Dany Street. At that time, Agent Agent Wilson was sent, but then disappeared. In fact, Wilson found her true self when she came to Dany Street, and decided to stay and protect the street. She warned Dany in time so they escaped. That's right, the host Maura Lee Curup was Agent Wilson back then. The prosperity of Dany Street depends on the happiness index of the residents, but the threat of the Bureau makes them uneasy. If attacked now, the weakened Dany Street will not be able to survive. Hearing this, Vic decided to stay and help, but Larry did not want to face the evil Bureau again. The two had a disagreement, and they parted ways. Unhappily, Larry drank alone in the bar to drown his sorrows. Watching the performance on stage, he imagined how nice it would be if there was a place like Dany Street that accepted his eccentricity, so he could shed his heavy disguise and be his true self. But that was just a fantasy. Waking up from his dream, Larry left the bar dejected and met Maura, formerly Wilson, dressed as a man. It turned out that Maura decided to sacrifice herself. She returned to the Bureau to surrender herself to distract the target in exchange for freedom for the street. At this time, Darren had led his troops closer. Dany Street advised Maura not to come back. This time they would not run away. Vic also agreed, so everyone stood up together against the Bureau. When Darren arrived, Maura had changed back into female clothes and confronted him. Darren saw his former colleague turn into what he thought was a monster, and immediately ordered an attack without hesitation. But when he turned around, he discovered that his soldiers had disappeared because Dany had teleported away. Under the witness of the residents, Maura fought Darren one-on-one and won overwhelmingly. Larry also mustered up the courage to punch Darren. He told him to send Lieutenant Traynor greetings to the Bureau. After chasing the Bureau away, Vic explained his purpose of coming here, but upon hearing the name Mr. Nobody, Dany Street was extremely scared. To protect the residents, Dany only dared to give Vic an old comic book as a clue, then immediately teleported out of sight. In another development, Cliff and Rita went to Doug's house, and indeed saw Jane in the persona of Karen. Karen welcomed Rita, but slammed the door in Cliff's face. With Rita watching, Karen suddenly proposed to Doug, but Doug's family hated Karen because she kept disappearing and was too unreliable. They forced Doug to choose between Karen and his family. Karen's eyes suddenly flashed green. She hypnotized Doug and his family one by one. The terrible proposals suddenly became strangely happy and harmonious. Rita knew something was wrong. If the other personalities woke up and discovered this, it would be a disaster. She advised Karen to cancel the wedding, but she hypnotized Rita too, forcing Rita to cooperate in organizing the wedding. Luckily, Cliff rushed in time. He was a robot, so he was not hypnotized. Cliff pushed Doug away and declared that if Jane did not agree, this wedding would not take place. Harassed by Cliff, Jane did not appear, but the fierce personality Hammerhead emerged again. Seeing Karen planning to get married, Hammerhead was furious and decided to kill Doug on the spot. In a desperate situation, Karen regained control. After several fierce body struggles, Jane fainted and fell into a coma. It was a late night decades ago. Little Kay was assembling a puzzle when her father called her away. Since then, a place called the Underground appeared in Kay's mind. Back in the present, Hammerhead was dragging Karen down to the Underground. Other personalities ran to see. When they saw Jane was there, they all told her to return to control her body. But this time, Jane was too tired and lost. She didn't want to return to face reality anymore. However, the personalities still forced her to get on the train back to the ground. The train driver saw Jane's thoughts, so he secretly suggested that she pull the emergency brake. That way, no one would be able to control her body for the time being. Jane could do what she wanted. That was the reason Jane was in a coma. In reality, Vic's scan showed that Jane's body index was normal, only her brainwaves were abnormal. He blurted out that it would be nice if he could get into her head. Suddenly, Larry's energy entity appeared. It pulled Cliff's consciousness and threw it straight into Jane's head. Cliff immediately restored his human form and fell into the Underground. At first, he didn't understand what was going on until he met the train driver. He realized he was in Jane's head. At that moment, Jane was feeling bored and playing with flower petals. A personality named Penny came to her. Every scene in the Underground originated from Jane's memories, and the place they were standing was the memory of when Penny was born. Jane longed to find answers. Why is there the Underground and so many personalities? How were they born? To find the answer, she went to the wise, three-headed personality. They said that if she wanted to know, she had to go into that well. Penny followed Jane there, and she tried to stop Jane because the well seemed very dangerous, but Jane was determined to go. Meanwhile, Hammerhead discovered Cliff had broken in. She beat him up and threw him into prison. There was also a strange scarecrow personality in the prison. Cliff angrily punched the wall, but felt pain because he was now in flesh form. However, the wall had a small crack. The scarecrow personality secretly gave him a chisel. Cliff used the chisel to dig into the wall and was surprised to see Jane sitting in the next room. He was about to apologize when Penny appeared. She said that it was not Jane, but just a memory. Penny led Cliff through some of Jane's memories, including the memory of the old main personality named Miranda. Miranda, like Jane, had tried to find the answer and had disappeared after entering that well. The next memory they passed through was a strange farm full of corpses, which seemed to be the memory of Miranda's old personality when she fell into that well. At first glance, this well seemed really scary. Next, they also saw the memory of Cliff's first meeting with Jane, or the memory of Niles enlightening Jane. These were all the most beautiful pieces in her heart. In the deepest part of the memory, they finally found Jane, but she didn't want to go back with Cliff, but just kept walking, straight towards the well. Without looking back, Penny, who was leading the way, also stopped here. Cliff had to continue the rest of the way by himself. The person guarding the well was a monster named Black Annis. She let Jane pass, but waved her claws to block Cliff outside the door, declaring that no man was allowed to pass through here. Cliff thought for a moment, then took off the fake flesh on his body, returning to his original form as a robot. In that case, let alone a man, he was not even considered human anymore. Black Annis observed for a while, then she agreed to let him in, only to see Jane standing absent-mindedly at the mouth of the well. Cliff quickly stepped forward to pull her back. Suddenly, a tornado of shapes swirled violently, forming the shape of Jane's father. In Jane's conscious world, her father was the most terrifying and invincible existence. Cliff wanted to protect Jane, but he was instantly torn in half by Jane's father. The sacrifice of his teammates aroused Jane's courage. She overcame the fear in her heart and faced her father directly. When Jane was no longer afraid, her father also lost his strength. He shattered into pieces and fell back into the well. The scene then switched to reality. The two took a car to leave the underground and woke up one by one. During that time, other friends in the real world also experienced a lot. This episode began with a flashback of Niles in 1913. Niles at that time looked no different than he did more than 100 years later. Through a conversation with a colleague, we discovered that the Bureau of Normalcy was originally founded by Niles. The two were talking when they were suddenly attacked by a pack of wolves. The condition of the colleague was unknown. Niles was in a more miserable state. Not only was his leg broken, but he was also being watched by a deer-headed monster. When Niles woke up, he found himself locked in a cave full of corpses, with only a female jungler as company. Niles tried to explain that he was a scientist, not a hunter who killed indiscriminately. However, in response, he only received a brutal beating. In fact, the female jungler treated Niles quite well. She fed him every day until his leg healed. But when he was able to walk again, she did not intend to let him go, but seemed to treat him as a pet. Niles was extremely angry. He worked hard to dig up the corpses to bury them. He wanted the female jungler to understand that they were also humans like him, not animals. The female jungler seemed to understand Niles's intentions. She brought the corpses to a stone formation. Looking at the vivid drawings on the rocks, Niles finally realized that the woman in front of him was much smarter and more advanced than he had imagined. What was more terrifying was that the tribe that created this stone formation had existed for tens of thousands of years, and this female jungler had lived since then. The other tribes had the same lifespan as ordinary people, only she was immortal. Niles secretly determined to find out her secret. After that, the two cremated the corpses in the stone formation. Along with the sacrificial dance of the forest woman, the deer-headed monster that had captured Niles earlier was suddenly summoned from nowhere. Niles witnessed this scene and was extremely surprised. Time returned to the present. There was an obese man named Ernest Franklin, who was old and still lived with his mother. His personality was extremely bad. His life seemed to be a failure. But obese men are often potential stocks. Under that ordinary appearance, there is hidden supernatural ability. He is the beard hunter. Franklin suddenly received a summons from the Bureau of Normalcy. He adjusted his clothes to carry out a top-secret mission: go to Doom Manor to search for Niles. At this time, the timeline was a little earlier than the previous episode. When the energy entity had just put Cliff's consciousness into Jane's head, Vic and Rita stood by, not knowing what to do. Therefore, they pulled out the comic book Dany left behind to study. Rita quickly discovered that a bodybuilder character named Flex Mentallo in the comic had disappeared. They were so engrossed in their research that they didn't know that an uninvited guest had sneaked into the manor. manor. After Franklin entered the manor, he went straight to the bathroom. He took out a long, accumulated hair and beard from the sink drain. An extremely perverted scene took place. He voraciously ate the hair and then passed out from the high. When he woke up, Franklin was tied to a chair. But even when facing a famous superhero like Vic, he still showed no fear. He called himself the Beard Hunter, with the ability to eat other people's hair and beard to connect and grasp all information about them. Hearing that he ate dirty hair and beard, Rita and Vic were both disgusted, completely unaware of the upcoming threat. However, Vic thought that if what he said was true, they could use him to find Niles. Therefore, he quickly took out a tracking chip. Franklin suddenly fell to the ground, inhaled a hair of Vic that fell on the floor, then confidently stood up and wanted to fight. At this time, Franklin not only revealed the secret deep in Vic's memory, but also predicted all of his attacks. Worse, Vic discovered that his hand cannon automatically activated, and no matter what he ordered, he could not turn it off. As a result, it exploded and blasted all three of them away. Having achieved his goal, Franklin ran away. Because the weapon went out of control and almost injured his teammates, Vic was forced to shut down the mechanical system in an emergency. He watched Franklin escape. The only good news was that Rita had secretly attached a tracking chip to him. Back to Niles' story more than 100 years ago. During their time together, his soul and the female jungler's soul were in harmony and feelings arose. Niles released his wild instincts and completely integrated into the jungler's life. But many years later, his colleagues at the bureau found him again. It turned out that he was still alive that day and had escaped to report. This time, he was ordered to return to investigate the female jungler. To protect his lover, Niles lured him onto the thin ice and watched him sink into the water. Because the female jungler's whereabouts had been revealed, Niles was forced to personally appear. He reassured the other bureau employees and followed them to the trial, using his return to exchange for the safety of his lover. Strangely, Mr. Nobody suddenly appeared in front of Niles in his memory. Through this memory, Mr. Nobody discovered Niles's secret, and he laughed loudly with satisfaction. Franklin was also getting closer and closer to the space where Niles was imprisoned, but halfway there he met a puppet of Niles, and when he turned around he saw a deer-headed monster waiting. While Cliff was busy saving Jane, Vic and Rita were busy dealing with Franklin. When Larry's consciousness wandered into a small motel, he met his gay lover John again and had a romantic date. The other person's reaction was so real that even though he knew this memory did not exist, Larry still wanted to immerse himself in it. But when the energy entity returned to his body, Larry was forced to leave the beautiful dream. It made him feel extremely lost. The next day, Cliff watched the news on TV and was shocked to find out that his daughter's stepfather had been attacked by a giant crocodile and died a few days ago. At this time, Jane and Rita were discussing how to find Niles. Vic's system was turned off and could not connect to the tracking chip. Therefore, their top priority was to find Flex Mentallo, the missing bodybuilder character in the comic book. But compared to Niles, Cliff wanted to see his daughter, who had just suffered the pain of losing her father again. Flit appeared enthusiastically. Without saying a word, she teleported both Jane and Rita to her stepfather's bar. Then she disappeared again. Cliff had been away from his daughter for 30 years, so he was extremely nervous. Luckily, thanks to Rita's encouragement, they dared to enter the bar. There was a memorial party for the stepfather. Rita introduced Cliff as the stepfather's old friend. This armor was made by him as a gift for Cliff on Halloween, so he wore it too. Remember, so the two of them naturally joined the party. Through Clara's speech, he found out that the stepfather had treated Clara as his own daughter for many years. He had wholeheartedly fulfilled his role as a father, a moral example for the locality, and a hero to his daughter. Clara also mentioned one regret. The golden watch that Cliff left as a keepsake, which she had given to her stepfather, had now been swallowed by the crocodile. That was the link between the two fathers, the most precious thing to her. Hearing that, Cliff immediately rushed into the swamp to search for the crocodile. He thought the only thing he could do for his daughter now was to find the watch. Despite Rita urging him to go back and talk to Clara, Cliff didn't have the courage to face his daughter in this body after 30 years. Rita's advice was not effective, so she had to leave first. At that moment, the giant crocodile appeared and attacked Cliff. In another development, Vic connected the grid system, that is, the offline network, to the computer to chat. He discovered that after the hand explosion, when the system recovered, it arbitrarily transformed his body into more machines. The mechanization rate increased from 41% to 63%. Vic was shocked and peeled peeled off the skin of his hand to see that the arm bone had completely turned into metal. At this time, Jane appeared and disappeared to find Vic. She discovered that Flex Mentalo had a wife. She could follow this clue to find him. As for Larry, after leaving the Dream Motel, he insisted on returning there. The energy entity could not stand his begging, so it brought him back to meet John. But this time, the meeting place was a gay bar. Larry only wanted to be alone with John, and did not like this noisy place. But John found this place very nice. John knew that Larry was only used to hiding his identity. He did not want to openly have a relationship in front of others, whether in a dream or a gay bar. Finally, John left a sentence. He really didn't want to spend his last day like this. Then he turned and left. Larry woke up with a start. He asked the entity why John said that. The entity wrote down the answer on a notepad. Larry followed the instructions to John's current residence. He finally understood what last day meant. John was seriously ill and about to die. It turned out that in the dream, the two met in real consciousness. John was overjoyed. He asked Larry to take him out to watch the sunset. Larry carried John out. They hadn't seen each other for decades. They had so much to talk about. John seemed to have seen that Larry was still tormented by the past. Therefore, he advised Larry to learn to let go of the past and move forward, just like John had done. At the same time, Vic and Jane went to find Flex's wife and accidentally saw a man abusing a woman. Jane immediately jumped in to stop him. As soon as she left, Vic was ambushed. The man's elbow shot out a laser beam to attack Vic, who was still confused and didn't know what was happening. When he tried to raise his hand again, Vic quickly broke his arm. Seeing that the situation was not good, the man ran to the car and escaped. The person driving him was the woman he had chased and beaten. Earlier, Vic had disappeared. The scene changed to the bar. Cliff returned covered in mud. He still couldn't say anything to his daughter. He just quickly glanced at her and then quietly turned away. Clara was surprised to find a gold watch on the table, with the words engraved on the back. "Dad, you are my hero." Under the sunset in another place, Larry listened to John tell him all about his life over the years. Although he had regrets, overall he lived quite well. Now it was Larry's turn to tell his life, but those sad stories were hard to talk about. He was about to start with the energy entity when he turned to see John peacefully passing away beside him. Larry touched his lover's forehead for the last time, tears falling under the bandage. He thanked the energy entity and he followed John's advice, bravely moving on. At this time, Vic was taken to a place called Ant Farm. The person who held him was Darren, the captain of the Bureau of Normalcy. We all know that Darren captured Vic, and he reported his exploits to his superiors. In fact, Vic was a legal superhero, so he was not on the Bureau's wanted list. However, the mechanical technology on his body contained countless scientific secrets that the Bureau was willing to risk capturing. Knowing that Vic was arrested by the Bureau, Larry, who had been imprisoned there, immediately guessed that he was sent to Ant Farm. That place was not only secret but also almost impenetrable from the outside. If Niles had not worked there, Larry would not have been able to escape. At this moment, Silas came. Everyone planned to hide Vic's arrest because Vic did not want his father to interfere too much. However, Silas quickly discovered the grid system on the computer. This proved that Vic was in big trouble. His prediction was correct. Vic's trouble was not just being imprisoned. His mechanical body began to reboot the grid system. Grid informed Vic that the self-repair program was a backdoor installed by his father. He could turn it off, but could not prevent Grid from going online again. Vic went crazy and turned off the system countless times, but it kept turning back on automatically, making him scream in despair. The cellmate in the next room could not bear it, so he had to shout at Grid not to push him too hard. Vic was stunned. Those sounds rang directly in his head, but the other inmate heard them. This guy had long hair and beard, was crazy and insane, and his background was unknown. At this time, the Bureau also discovered the abnormality. They could not find anything out from Vic and almost drove him crazy. After using all his connections but could not save his son, Silas had no choice but to ask the Doom Patrol to break into Ant Farm to save Vic. Larry disguised himself as a soldier to escort Cliff, while Silas carefully turned on the elevator switch. This elevator was more exciting than a roller coaster, almost making them throw up. Unexpectedly, as soon as they got out of the elevator, Larry was exposed. The whole group was shot down by a tranquilizer gun. Cliff was sucked tightly by the electromagnet, and Larry's energy entity was also sucked into the tank by the machine. Darren smiled politely and invited Silas to meet his son. It seemed that the whole group had been betrayed by Silas. Larry and Jane were taken away for research. Only Cliff was sucked onto the magnet. The employee said that this pile of scrap metal was worthless, and he could just treat it like trash. Cliff was angry and shouted at the employee, "Have you ever seen a human brain brain running in a
desastre.
machine and said it was worthless. The employee replied, "Don't say you saw it. The Bureau has made many, and they are all better than Cliff's." After saying that, he stuck the label "trash" on Cliff's forehead. In fact, Silas did not betray them. It was all part of the plan. The Bureau certainly did not foresee their secret trick. When no one was watching, Cliff opened his mouth and spat out the shrinking Rita. Just as the employee turned around, he was crushed by Rita like a piece of meatloaf. On the other side, before her teammates could come to her rescue, Jane suddenly switched to Karen's personality. She hypnotized the employee who had been torturing her and turned him into a submissive follower. After the three reunited, the officer was punched away by the newly emerged personality, Hammerhead. The whole group ran wild through the Bureau like horses with broken reins. They saved Larry. His energy entity conveniently defeated the technicians and opened all the cell doors. One of them was filled with very strange staring eyes. Following the screaming, "The butts are gone," from the fleeing employees, a group of butt-shaped monsters with eyes rushed out. Don't be fooled by their funny appearance. When these butts opened their mouths, they were full of sharp teeth, with terrifying destructive power. Hearing that the butt monsters had escaped, the head of the Bureau of Normalcy was so scared that he committed suicide on the spot. In another development, because Vic still did not completely trust Heather Silas, he hesitated to install the grid network connection chip that his father gave him. The conflict of trust between father and son exploded violently. At this moment, Vic's system suddenly played a surveillance video. It showed that Silas seemed to know that the grid system would eventually take over Vic's consciousness, but he still deliberately implanted it into his son's body. Vic finally exploded, losing control and brutally beating his father. Only after beating his father did he realize that it was all Mr. Nobody's scheme. From the increased level of mechanization, the system's constant reboots to the surveillance video just now, it was all Mr. Nobody's setup. When the group of friends ran to the meeting, they only saw Vic holding his unconscious father in his arms. He regretted, but it was too late. The screen changed to 1964. At that time, there was a famous superhero named Flex Mentallo. He had the ability to use his muscles to control vibrational waves. The specific principle was not clear. In short, as long as he flexed his muscles, he could do anything. That day, Flex helped a child save a kitten, but he ended up being swallowed by that kitten. Could it be that the Flurkin monster from the Marvel neighborhood had wandered into this film set? Back to the present, after Larry's energy entity brought Vic out, Rita was also extremely surprised when she discovered that the bearded and hairy cellmate in the next room was Flex Mentallo. It turned out that he was also imprisoned here by the Bureau of Normalcy. At this time, the Bureau's reinforcements had arrived. Jane's flit personality immediately appeared and she teleported everyone back to safety. After being sucked out of Larry's body, the energy entity awakened a new skill, which was that it would no longer lose consciousness when leaving the host. Larry took this opportunity to let the entity leave him forever. He returned freedom to both of them. However, the entity seemed not to want that, so it showed Larry a memory. Years ago, when Larry was first arrested at Ant Farm, the cellmate in the next room happened to be Flex Mentallo. At that time, Flex's mind was still very clear. He even heard the voice of the energy entity that Larry could not hear. Flex only needed to tense the only group of muscles that could still move in his body, and he created a large hole in the wall. If only Larry would reach out and untie Flex, the two could escape together. However, Larry thought it was too far-fetched at the time, so he didn't dare to act. On the contrary, the energy entity actively supported this proposal. Unfortunately, their plan was suddenly interrupted, and Flex was forced to restore the wall to deal with the Bureau's people. Back in reality, Flex now had no memory of the past. He had almost forgotten everything. Cliff and Jane helped him cut his hair and shave. They restored Flex Mentallo's old appearance in the hope that his familiar appearance would help him remember something. As a result, apart from watching TV series on time, Flex couldn't remember anything. At the hospital, Rita was staying by Vic's side. She encouraged Vic to use the chip to reactivate the grid system, from there to track down the beard hunter to find Niles. But Vic had just been tortured terribly by the system. He needed more time to dare to reconnect. While Rita was waiting in the hospital, the sound of a baby crying reminded her of a bad memory from the past. She went out into the hallway to find some quiet. When the elevator door opened, Rita met an old man who was lost lost. She kindly showed him the way, and she talked for a while. The old man said that he had run away from home, abandoned his family, so now he was punished by being alone until old age. He considered himself a bad person. The old man's story seemed to touch Rita's heart, making her start to tell her own experiences. Rita said that she used to be a broker, specializing in bringing actresses who wanted to be famous to meet unscrupulous directors. After a few successful deals that satisfied all three parties, an incident occurred. An actress named Mary got pregnant unexpectedly and gave birth to a child, but the director did not take responsibility. Mary went to Rita for help, but she only received a mere bet payment in charity. A week later, Mary committed suicide. For a moment, Rita felt guilty and wanted to adopt Mary's child. But at that time, a blockbuster movie shot in Africa invited her to play the main role, so she put the baby behind her and flew to Africa. Therefore, Rita always felt that the accident she encountered afterward was as a worthy punishment. It was the most painful memory in the depths of her soul. Meanwhile, Flex was still intently watching the TV series, making Jane and Cliff beside him feel restless. Jane suggested that if the soft suggestion didn't work, then use strong measures. Who knows, if Flex got angry, he might use his superpowers and remember. Hearing that, Cliff punched the TV to pieces. Flex was so angry that his veins popped out. His anger was soaring, but in the end he just burst into tears. The two looked at each other in confusion. Larry's flashback continued. While Larry was still hesitating about breaking out with Flex, the energy entity flew out of his body again. But this time it was interrupted by the Bureau's men pushing him into a TV, which showed Flex's wife being held hostage. This time, Flex was forced to compromise. He apologized to the energy entity and said that he couldn't break out anymore. The flashback ended, and Larry realized that it was his cowardice in the past that had caused both him and Flex to suffer. But thanks to this memory, he knew the key to waking Flex up. Larry immediately told Jane and Cliff the key point. Jane's flit personality appeared, and in the blink of an eye, she teleported Flex's wife back to Doom Manor. However, she had been transformed by the Bureau of Normalcy into a puppet with a mechanical device attached to her elbow. When the couple met again, they regained their memories and hugged each other. But the beautiful scene did not last long. The wife's body suddenly emitted a warning sound, and then the device self-destructed, causing her to turn into ashes right in Flex's arms. Flex Mental's rage finally exploded completely. The shock energy from him was so strong that it affected the entire Manor's electrical system. At the hospital, Vic finally prepared himself mentally. He plugged in the chip and restarted the grid system. At that time, the old man who had been helped by Rita suddenly transformed into Mr. Nobody. It turned out that he had been observing everything and knew every move of Doom Manor. This invincible villain who could travel through space and time. He even knew that he was a character in the movie. He burned the movie poster and signaled that a final battle was about to break out. In 1946 in Chicago, Miss Nobody had not yet become Miss Nobody. He was just a petty criminal who had just been fired from the evil organization called the Brotherhood of Evil. Seriously, he was also considered an inventor. It was just that his level of invention was no different from an elementary school student's handiwork. His wife advised him to go back and apologize to the boss of the Brotherhood of Evil. However, he was so proud that he had no reason to come back since he had completely withdrawn. His wife was so disappointed that she left a sentence saying he would forever be an unknown person and then left him. Back in the present, the main group of characters followed the Beard Hunter's location and found Dany's street. It turned out that this guy, after failing to find Niles, had hidden there. When the hot-tempered hammerhead personality tried to torture him, Dany Street suddenly spoke up and said that Dany knew where Niles was. But Dany was afraid of Miss Nobody. Encouraged by everyone, Dany revealed that Niles and Miss Nobody were in white space. Just like the white space between panels in comics, there was a similar space between multiverses, and coincidentally, Flex Mentallo had a special muscle that could take them there. The group of 4 people from Doom Manor mustered up their courage to let Flex take them into white space, but Flex chose the wrong muscle, accidentally activating a special superpower that made everyone around him reach orgasm. In an instant, the whole street stopped working. Everyone had a look of ecstasy, let out moans of happiness, and finally, everyone screamed with joy, experiencing the ultimate feeling of sublimation. After that comedy, Flex tried again. This time, the 4 of them were taken into each person's memory before the accident. Mr. Nobody's voice rang out seductively in their ears. He offered extremely attractive conditions, as long as they stayed in this memory and did nothing. Cliff would not have a car accident and continue to live a happy life with his wife and children. Larry would not have his face ruined and lose everything. Rita could refuse the trip to Africa to continue being a big star, and Jane could forget the haunting nightmares. She was no longer split into multiple personalities. These conditions made them waver for a moment, but soon they woke up. What happened could not be changed. They had already accepted their past. The most important thing now was to find their eldest brother, Niles. When the 4 of them escaped the illusion, they entered a white space. Following Rita's call, the group finally found Niles, who they had been longing for day and night, and the boss, Mr. Nobody. At this time, Jane switched to the personality of Dr. Harrison, a master psychologist. She exposed that Mr. Nobody did these childish, evil things purely out of his paranoia, and the root cause was because of a woman. Mr. Nobody heard that and immediately revealed his true form. The scene of being abandoned by his wife years ago reappeared in white space. The entire Doom Patrol looked at him with pity, making him furious. He was about to attack when he was suddenly shot to pieces from behind. It turned out that Vic had arrived in time and used a cannon to finish Mr. Nobody off. What followed was a happy ending. Everyone surrounded Niles to tell him about their recent adventures. After returning to the manor, they reformed the Doom Patrol and began their journey to eliminate evil. But when faced with the attack of the Brotherhood of Evil, the group was burned to ashes by a giant robot firing a laser beam. The scene changed. The Doom Patrol attacked again, but this time they were trampled by the robot. The scene of the Doom Patrol's defeat was repeated countless times before Niles' eyes. Finally, he realized that everything was still under Mr. Nobody's control. At this moment, another Vic appeared at the manor with a bewildered expression, while Vic, who was standing next to the main group, smiled evilly and revealed his true form as Mr. Nobody. It turned out that the victory scene just now was just a play that he directed and performed. He sarcastically said that if stupidity was a superpower, they would definitely be stronger than the Justice League. However, this prank was just an appetizer. Next, he launched the real killer move. He forced Niles to tell the whole truth of the past. When the main group of characters went through so much hardship to come here to save Niles, they had to hear him admit a cruel truth with his own mouth. The tragedy that happened to them was not a random accident, but was all arranged by him. As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere immediately became heavy. Niles continued to explain that he did so because he wanted to find a method of immortality. Hearing this, Hammerhead angrily attacked Niles. At that moment, Miss Nobody froze everyone, and he threw them out. In the white space, only his crazy laughter remained. Time returned to 1961, when Niles was still a senior leader of the Bureau of Normalcy. They planned to send a pilot into space to contact with strange matter, and that person was Larry. Niles knew the risks of this plan, but he still did it. His assistant wondered why he still wanted to put others in danger when Rita was the perfect specimen, but Niles did not care. In 1976, the Bureau brought Niles a new specimen, a Spanish woman with multiple personality disorder, Jane. In 1988, Niles cried to Vic's mother about the new research subject, a race car driver. According to the original plan, he only intended to cause a small accident. However, unexpectedly it turned into a major tragedy that killed the race car driver's wife, leaving only the race car driver's brain for experimentation. This made Niles extremely regretful. In 2014, after the explosion of Vic and his mother's laboratory, Niles transformed his body to save Vic's life. However, his real purpose was just to continue researching immortality. Although Vic's father had been grateful for Niles saving his son, he was very dissatisfied with the fact that Niles had treated Vic as an experiment. Therefore, he refused to let Niles take Vic back to Doom Manor. Back in the present, 6 months had passed since the clash in white space. The Doom Patrol had disbanded and gone their separate ways. Larry and Rita had rented a house to live together. Rita taught acting at a third-rate high school, while Larry was unemployed at home. In his free time, Larry practiced by the river. Now he could let the energy entity leave his body for more than 20 seconds while still staying conscious. Vic's situation was not very good. Every day when he came home, he had nightmares about the day his body had been transformed. He was deeply immersed in painful memories. The person who had suffered the biggest blow was Jane. She had once considered Niles as her father, and the harsh truth had made her completely despair about life. Jane's spirit was extremely chaotic. She had to take sedatives and lock herself in an abandoned bus, sleeping in a coma, isolated from the world. Cliff was always by her side, inside to take care of her. As time passed, Mr. Nobody felt bored alone in white space. At that time, the supervillain Ezekiel the Cockroach, who was also the prophet of the apocalypse, jumped out. It reminded Niles that he had a daughter. Mr. Nobody was extremely excited because he finally had something to do. After that, the villain trio, including Ezekiel the Cockroach, Admiral Whiskers the Mouse, who was the mouse that had crawled into Cliff's hand, and Mr. Nobody, gathered together to prepare for battle. Not long after, rock music rang out in the main character's ears. Following the music, they returned to Doom Manor without prior agreement. At that time, Niles was sitting in front of a painting waiting for them. First, he explained the reason why he had longed for immortality. It turned out that Niles and the female jungler had a daughter named Dorothy. Niles had hidden her in Dany's street. Dorothy possessed superpowers that could destroy the world, threatening the survival of the world. Therefore, Niles was forced to find a way to live forever, or at least live longer than his daughter, to be her guardian, preventing her from destroying the world. But Mr. Nobody discovered Dorothy and trapped both her and Dany's street in a painting. Niles needed everyone's help to save his daughter. Although Cliff strongly objected, Jane agreed to help Niles. Rita also expressed that only when she was with everyone did she truly feel happy. So the group decided to get into the painting to save Dorothy. In the world of the painting, Dany's street was devastated by the destruction of the giant Ezekiel cockroach. The group looked at this scene in amazement. This cockroach, who had been waiting for the end of the world, finally got its wish. Next, they saw Mr. Nobody running away. They followed him into the bar and saw the beard hunter there too. It turned out that Mr. Nobody had used a bag of beards from famous people like Lincoln, Da Vinci, and the Beatles to bribe the beard hunter. He had gotten information about Dorothy, from which he caused this chaos. Mr. Nobody did not expect that when he lowered the space level to get into the painting, he would no longer be able to freely transform. Worse, Dorothy also turned Ezekiel the Cockroach and Whiskers into giants. Now Mr. Nobody could only hide and hide. Having come to this point, the Doom Patrol did not give up easily. They made an escape plan, but from the beginning encountered problems on the way to find Dorothy. She was accidentally swallowed by the giant whiskers. Everyone had to continue the plan. Vic pulled Whiskers away, and Jane and Niles took the opportunity to go to Dorothy's hiding place. After picking up the girl, Jane used her flit personality to teleport everyone into Ezekiel the Cockroach's stomach. Meanwhile, Rita at the nightclub persuaded Mr. Nobody to use his space-time narrator skills to perform a good play. Under Rita's arrangement, Mr. Nobody used his narration to make Ezekiel the Cockroach eat both Vic and Rita, and at the same time, he made Whiskers and Ezekiel the Cockroach kiss. Thanks to that, Cliff, who had been in the mouse's stomach, went through the mouth and crawled into the cockroach's stomach to reunite with everyone. When everyone was gathered in the cockroach's belly, Larry used the cosmic radiation in his body to tear a hole in the paint. He led everyone, along with Dany's street, who had now turned into a brick, and the cockroach Ezekiel out to safety. At the end of the story, Vic used a laser to cut open Ezekiel the cockroach's belly. Everyone escaped safely, and they reunited with Larry in the real world. Only their size was still as small as when they had been in the painting. As for Mr. Nobody and the Beard Hunter, they were trapped in the painting, unable to move. The story of Doom Patrol Season 1 ended here. It must be said that Niles' personality twist really surprised the audience, but as the soul of the team, he had to shoulder too much responsibility, helplessness, and guilt. Stemming from regret and responsibility, Niles always considered the team as family and kept them by his side. But when the secret curtain was lifted, where will the fate of the Doom Patrol go? How powerful is the girl Dorothy, who has just appeared with ultimate power? How many variables will her presence bring to Doom Manor? All these questions will be answered in the next parts. Goodbye, and see you again in the next part of Doom Patrol.